If you've ever tried to solve this problem from a coding perspective, or if you've ever wanted to solve this problem, there's an obvious approach that people usually go toward. And I've seen it again and again in the many examples that are out there. But if you compare them to the real thing, you can see that they're not quite right. So you're coding along, you're doing the procedures the way that it looks obvious, and you keep noticing that it's just not quite right. Eventually you're like, maybe my procedures aren't the best. Maybe I could try something different. So that's kind of what I did. I tried a completely different approach, and it doesn't produce the exact output. In fact, it's a little bit obviously different, but I think the totality of it really sells it as being distinct from the other impressions that are out there that do the obvious approach that is almost an uncanny valley. It's like, that's not right. So when I tried mine, I'm like, that looks a little bit closer to right, and this is my impression here. The challenge of solving this problem is the original artist hasn't revealed in detail how he did this. He's revealed how it was inspired. He's told us a little bit about how the fonts were made. But as far as the procedures go, we're kind of left wondering how this was done. Now, it was done way back, so it can't be that complicated, right? Well, it can be a little bit. Some of the older procedures, I mean, even going back to 1968, are kind of challenging to take on. I recently went back to George Nees, who did some work in generative art, a very popular generative artist at the beginning of generative art, and he created something called gravel. So I went back, I looked at that, and started playing around with it, and here's one of the artworks that I got to come out of it. And you can see that there are units here that are kind of moving up and down against one another, and it's more chaotic at the bottom. And this is the signature of the gravel generative art. So I did that a few times and played around with it, and I thought, well, maybe I can get these units to go down the screen. So I just changed my procedures a little bit and made the units fall down the screen, and when I did, I noticed that it looked really familiar to something. So here's the same procedures that I used in the previous generative art, except for they're moving down the screen, and when they get so far, they pop back up and they arrange themselves in a certain way. I'm like, well, if I just take out the geometries and put in text, what would that look like? So instead of having colored boxes, I have these boxes with letters in them, and the letters are just kind of randomly drawn, and there's like a lead character at the bottom of each column that's a different color. So you can see we're on our way to doing the matrix code, but in a completely different way. They aren't just random columns going down. It's not an array of characters that are in the column necessarily. This is more done like a grid, and the grid is like the anchor points, and then each one of the characters there moves away from its anchor point by a random velocity, and they can only go so far if they run up against one of them below, so they'll kind of stack up like traffic. And I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. It's not even really the same as the matrix, but the result, I think it actually worked. After messing around with things for a while, I realized, yeah, I could use this for the matrix code rain animation. Why not? So here's the first iteration, and it's okay. It's missing some finer touches, like the color's off. The lead characters in the columns aren't distinct. They really need to stand out. And it's just not dense enough. And then the characters are off. So when you take all those things together, you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's someone's impression of the matrix code rain, but it's not even close to the real thing. So I had to work on it a little bit. I thought about making the star characters that are flashing. You can see single characters flashing in random locations. I thought I'd make those move up. Maybe that would change the variety a little bit. And then I looked at the original. I was like, no, that's not working. So then I tried the Unicode character set for Japanese characters, and I thought, well, that looks like a recipe book, which is what actually inspired the original artwork. So I downloaded a font that was more closely representative of the real thing, although there are some differences that I'm not real happy with, but you do what you can. In this fourth iteration here, I have a lot of the elements together. So in the first iteration, I had the columns that were falling down, and I had the stars that were randomly appearing behind them. In this one, I added a mask. So when you look at the original Matrix code ring, you can see that the columns will disappear starting at the top of the column going down to the lead character. And they fade away almost like that character disappears, the next one disappears. So it's like the array is being emptied in that column. I could do that math, but that's a pretty big block of code, and I thought of maybe there's an easier way to accomplish practically the same thing. So I decided I would use a mask. So each column has a bar that's a mask that falls down from the top off the canvas. It just kind of travels over the canvas and goes all the way down past the canvas, and it obscures the column, and then it will reappear as the bar gets past it. And it's a really long bar, so you don't notice that it's a mask so much. It actually looks like the characters are being erased from the top to the bottom. So there's that added authenticity to the code just by adding this extra block to it. This was a really fun problem to solve in P5.js. When I was doing it years ago, when the Matrix first came out, was like 25 years ago or something like that. I was doing it probably in BASIC at the time, some form of BASIC, QBasic or Visual Basic or something like that. And to get things to look exactly right, you've got to do a lot of work. And as just a challenge, a coding challenge, as a hobby codist, I wasn't willing to put in the work to make it look exact. I just wanted to see if I could accomplish the procedures to make stuff rain down the screen. And I did, but it wasn't stellar. It didn't look like it. It didn't seem very useful. So I abandoned it. Then fast forward to today, I learned P5.js, learned JavaScripting, and I wanted to take on this challenge again. Fortunately, the coding train, Daniel Schiffman, had a guest coder on that did the example, and it was a very basic pedestrian example of it. I'm not trying to diss it. It was really cool how she did it. But that's usually the common procedures, and she admitted at the end that there were some things that she had to do to make it look a little bit more realistic. And that's the nature of this problem. You start out with your basic procedures, what looks obvious, you put those in, and then you realize, yeah, it needs a little bit of something. So then you put the little bit of something in, whatever it is. And by the end, you have something that looks like this. I feel like it needs to be more dense. Like, there needs to be a depth to it. I feel like there's just one layer of code that's like flat in one plane. And if I could increase the number of columns, fade out the text, and decrease the size of the font, and then set it in the back so that it looks like there's some depth to this code, that would eat up so much processing it wouldn't even function. As it is right now, I had to record this feed at regular speed, and then bring it into an editing software, and then speed it up like 4 to 8 times to get the code to look like it's raining at the right speed. Because in P5.js, maybe I should do this in processing, but P5.js is just, it's too clunky, it's got too much stuff built around it to help make it easy, and it slows stuff down. So maybe another language this would work a lot better, but in P5.js it's really slow. So the best thing you can hope to do is just record the output and then edit it later in some separate software as a video, which is what I did, and that works okay. I did some research for this. I didn't get in really heavy, but I did search for some things like how it was done, how the font was made, what are the procedures, what did this artist do exactly to create the Matrix code ring. And you're not going to find that information easily, or at least I wasn't able to find it easily. The best I could find was what inspired the font and how it was sort of made, although it's not exactly stated what was done to what characters to make them what they are. That's kind of encoded in the artist's work. that person has never revealed how this trick was done. So you're left with the impressions that you're left with that people have made aren't perfectly informed. So they all have their own little thing that's not quite right. And I say that it's not quite right, not as a diss, but it's just a depart from the original artwork. And that's okay, because I like the different takes. I like what people key in on. You can see in their impressions what they're really focused on in this artwork, whether it's the highlight character at the front of the streamers, or the density of the streamers, or the colors, or whatever it is that they will nail, and then the other things will be kind of a little bit off. And I feel like that's an interesting exercise, just as a person who appreciates art and the effort that goes into it, and the impression that goes through someone's mind when they see it, and then put that back out for you to see. This is what I'm seeing. So I really like that process. Hopefully by next week I'll have a tutorial for this. That's what I've been working on, and that's why I don't really have a video for this week, because hammering out how to explain this code in a video has been really challenging, because it's kind of in depth. So the first thing I wanted to do was just explain the problem and how I approached it, and hopefully you'll join me when there is a video out for this this coding challenge. If you'd like to join me for that, and I wish you would, hit the subscribe, hit the notifications to be notified for when that video comes out, or just check back in a week or two and hopefully I'll have that video up. In the meantime, there are plenty of other videos to watch. If you haven't checked those out, give those a look and see if it's something that you enjoy, something that you can learn from or be inspired by. I guess that's it for this video, and as always, until next time, take care.